BS-Free Witchcraft is a production of the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network. Nerd and Tie produces podcasts ranging from actual play to true crime, and you can find more at nerdandtie.com or join our Discord by going to nerdandtie.com/Discord. Welcome to BS-Free Witchcraft, your monthly guide to the modern witchcraft movement. Mine's a lot of the usual, bullshit. I'm your host, Trey Dorn. It is August of 2025. And this month we're going to talk about something that I've been meaning to discuss for a while now, though this is a topic that was nowhere on my roadmap when I started this show. For those of you who don't know, when I started doing BS for Witchcraft way back in 2018, I actually had a roadmap of topics I wanted to cover, and I've gone through probably about 75% of those. But this topic was not on my list, and I think by the end of the episode, you will understand why it was not originally on my list. Because this month, we are talking about shadow work. Now, anyone who follows me on TikTok knows that this summer, I got into a whole thing about this on my TikTok account, and if you want to go back and watch those videos, they are exasperating, to say the least. It became a whole thing. So I thought that rather than keep getting into little fights about it on TikTok, I would just dedicate an episode of this podcast to it, so I could put everything I thought about the topic in one place that you could reference for at least my opinion, to start with. So what we're going to talk about in this episode is where shadow work comes from, what it is, when it became an idea in witchcraft and how I think it got here, and then whether or not I think we really should be actually recommending that witches do this. Because right now, it is very common in witchcraft spaces to hear someone say, oh, you should go do shadow work. Like, they will just blanket recommend that to everyone. And I think that by the end of this, you'll at least see where I'm coming from, where I think this is kind of bad. This is like a bad idea to tell people this. But whether you agree with me or not, I think you'll at least understand where I'm coming from when I say that. And just as a preface, because whenever I say I think anything's a bad idea, people get mad at me. I'm just going to say before we start, because I know this is a topic that's important to a lot of people, I am not in your head. I am not in your house. I am not in charge of you. I say that a lot, but when I say it, when I'm not in your head, what that means is that I do not feel what you feel. I am not seeing what you are seeing. I'm not having your direct experiences. And when I say I'm not in your house, is that I am not there, and I am not going to smack the crystals out of your hand and tell you, no! Stop it! I'm not going to do any of that, right? I am not in charge of you. I have not had your experiences, and I am not in charge of you. So, before you get mad at me, because I feel like this is an episode where someone might get mad at me, before you get mad at me, please recognize that I am not claiming any authority over you. I hate that I have to say this, but I am not in charge of you. I am not trying to be in charge of you. So if at the end, if you disagree with my opinion, you can still just keep doing what you want. Because I will look at you a little bit. But I want you to keep that in mind before we start. Because I might get spicy in my opinion. And I know that some people like that when that happens, but some people also don't. And before you get mad at me, I just want you to remember that I am in no way asserting authority over you or your personal practice. All right? All right? All right. So, to talk about shadow work, to talk about this entire idea, we have to go back and talk about a little bit, not a lot. We're not going to dig into this to the guy too much, but we're going to talk a little bit about Carl Jung, the psychologist Carl Jung. So, Carl Jung was Swiss. He was born in 1875 in Switzerland. He passed in 1961. And he is literally one of the most influential psychologists in history. Like, when you talk about, like, famous psychologists, the list of names that most people know, that if they know the names of any famous psychologists, the names they know Sigmund Freud, obviously, and they know Carl Jung is the second name they know. Right? He was close friends with Freud for a while. They had a falling out. It's a whole thing. I don't care. Like, the personal problems between two dead psychologists is not really my purview. But well, the important differences between Jung and Freud with psychology are twofold. First off, and this is less important to our discussion, but unlike Freud, Jung did not think our personalities were formed around our libido. Mostly because Jung wasn't an idiot, but like that is one key difference. Because again, if there's anything anyone knows, if people know one psychologist, it's Freud. If they know anything about Freud, it's that he was obsessed with sex. Jung was not. Secondly, Jung thought Freud had too limited a view on the unconscious mind. If people know one thing about Jung, it's the phrase collective unconscious. Jung thought that the unconscious mind that were like symbols and ideas that all humans innately understood and were born with. According to Jung, Freud considered the unconscious mind to just be like our repressed emotions and desires. Jung would call this the personal unconscious. Jung proposed that beyond this, there was again this collective unconscious. And he proposed this idea early on. But to try to explain this, on October 19th, 1936, Jung said in a lecture, my thesis then is as follows. In addition to our immediate consciousness, which is of a thoroughly personal nature and which we believe to be the only empirical psyche, even if we tack on the personal unconscious as an appendix, there exists a second psychic system of a collective, universal, and impersonal nature which is identical in all individuals. This collective unconscious does not develop individually but is inherited. It consists of pre-existent forms, the archetypes, which can only become conscious secondarily and which give definite form to certain psychic contents. That's from the concept of collective conscious to the Abernethian Society at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an authority on this topic. I also don't really believe this. But one thing you can see is why the later New Age movement would eat this shit up. If there's any lesson you learn, is that New Agers love Carl Jung. I think I first heard of Carl Jung when I was watching an episode of Northern Exposure, and Chris in the Morning and his half-brother Bernard shared a dream, and a version of Carl Jung appeared in the dream. It's a funny episode. Go watch it. Northern Exposure is a good show. So Jung had this idea that there was a collective, singular unconscious that's shared by all people. Now, there's problems with this idea, for sure, but that's what Jung believed. And now knowing this, we got to talk about the shadow. The shadow itself. What is the shadow in shadow work? Well, both Freud and Jung proposed the idea of the shadow, but it's usually associated with Jung because Freud's entire concept of the shadow overlaps almost completely with his entire concept of the unconscious mind. So we're going to talk about Jung because his definition is effectively the ones people work with. And for Jung, it is a mental blind spot. It is the part of ourselves that we repress. Some of this is stuff we don't like about ourselves. Some of it is trauma that we are pushing away. And it can also be positive stuff that we push away because of low self-esteem. It's everything we don't want to admit that's a part of ourselves. I guess, sort of. I'm not a psychologist, and I took Psych 101 in college. I got an A, but that was also like 20 years ago. Longer. Oh boy. So, anyways, these ideas form the shadow self. Jungians believe it can appear in dreams and manifest in other ways, but it's the idea that there's this second self in your mind who is composed of all the stuff that you don't really want to recognize as a part of yourself, and that forms the shadow self. And so that again, so we know who came up with the idea of the shadow. We know what the shadow is. What is shadow work? Glad you asked that in the hypothetical conversation that I just had in my head. Shadow work, maybe with my shadow. Shadow work is the act of effectively trying to integrate the shadow self with your conscious self. It's done through either daydreaming or meditation, where you effectively try to interact and work with your shadow self. And there's a number of ways to do this, and I'm sure that you'll find 20 blogs on the internet giving you exact definitions of techniques for doing it. Sometimes it's through creative output, sometimes it's through journaling. There's lots of different variations on it, but the goal for any of these, the goal for any of these things is to integrate the shadow with the conscious mind. Now, whether or not Jung thought that was a good idea is up for debate, and there's a whole thing, but that is, the difference between integrating with the shadow and merging with the shadow. There's a lot of details on that. But what it is in the end, what shadow work is in the end, is a psychology exercise based off of the works of Carl Jung. And that's it. That's what it is. That's what shadow work is. So I guess that kind of begs an important question. Why the fuck is this witchcraft? Like, why do I go online into witchcraft spaces and I see witches telling people that they have to do shadow work as a part of their witchcraft? Because everything I just talked about, everything that I just talked about is Jungian psychology. And whether or not people agree with it being accurate or not, whether psychologists agree that these terms and that this entire method and all this stuff, whether they agree or not that this is accurate, regardless, it's psychology. The entire thing is a psychology concept, an idea from psychology, and this is a psychology exercise. So, why are we telling people to do this? And I'm going to be honest with you. I think the biggest reason people are doing this is because it's got shadow in the name. That sounds like cool-ass witchcraft stuff when you call it shadow. Look, shadow work is not new. Shadow work, when I was coming up as a witch in the 90s, was not a common part of witchcraft. People did not talk about it as a part of witchcraft. 10 years ago, it was not a common idea in witchcraft. And we're talking 2015. Shadow work was not a common part of witchcraft. This idea really enters witchcraft discourse about 6 years ago. Now, it people started talking about in witchcraft spaces a little bit earlier than that. I think I found earlier references around 9 years ago, 10 years ago, but 6 years ago is really when the idea caught on. Now, I cannot pinpoint who the first person to bring this up was. There are lots of different websites, lots of different books, but it's really clear that the popularity exploded about 6 years ago. Like, when I started doing the show, I had never heard the term shadow work. I had heard of the Jungian shadow, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but about why I had heard of it before, but it was never like a witchcraft thing. Like, and the phrase shadow work had never entered my world until literally after I was doing this show. And I can't remember if it was someone who wrote into me on Tumblr or if it was someone who wrote into the show on one of the feedback episodes. I think it was Tumblr, but it was someone asked me about shadow work, and I sat there dumbfounded, going like, I don't know what that. I had to Google it. I had to look it up. I was like, this is a thing I never heard of. And now that's, to be fair, like, I'm a Wiccan witch. Like, there's tons of stuff that happens and develops over the years that I haven't heard of. Like, that's just normal, right? Not every witch does everything, and that's the thing we always have to keep in mind, right? Like, I'm the worst person in the world to ask tarot questions about, because I have never done a tarot reading in my life. But a lot of witches are into it, right? A lot of witches do it because it's a form of divination. Like, there's lots of divinatory forms that different kinds of witches do. I've never done lithomancy either. I'd be a terrible authority on that topic. That doesn't make me less of a witch. It just means that we all there's too much stuff for everyone to do everything. So when someone first mentioned shadow work to me like 5 or 6 years ago, I thought, okay, it's just a thing I don't do. That's just a thing I don't do. No big deal. Moved on with my life. But then I kept seeing it more and 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 fucking more. Just all over the place. So, why do I think that this idea I don't know who's responsible for bringing it in, but shadow work is not that recent a thing, though. While it is that recent to witchcraft, it did exist in another community that is adjacent, and that is the New Age movement. So, like, when I say that shadow work wasn't a thing in the 90s, I am not, and let me be clear, I am not saying that no witches were doing shadow work in the 90s. I am not saying that, because I am 100% certain that somebody was, because shadow work, the Jungian shadow was a very common idea in New Age books forever, because New Agers love Jung. They love his ass. If you go and you pick up, like, the late Ted Andrews book, Animal Speak, he's in there talking about the fucking Jungian shadow in a book. That book's got so many problems. Oh my God. Ugh. Lou Allen has published some stuff that doesn't necessarily age well. And I think that thing didn't age well the moment it stepped off the press. Whoa. Whoa. Like, the list of books that, like, were influential on me in the 90s that I am embarrassed that I read, Ted Andrews' Animal Speaks on the list. But anyways, he talks about the Jungian shadow in there. That was actually probably my first exposure to the idea, was in a book about animal totems. Anyways, like, you can find a ton of self-help books talking about shadow work and the Jungian shadow. You obviously, because it comes from psychology. And then the idea, Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious really is an exciting idea for people who believe in the concept of psychic powers. I talk a lot of smack, but yes, I also believe in it. Shut up. But, like, because of that, Carl Jung is really popular in the New Age movement, and like fucking crystals, stuff from the New Age movement drifts right into the witchcraft movement, even if it did not come from here. And stuff comes in different stages, right? Like, so when you get the guys who are talking about, like, all of this different spooky stuff next door to the other people talking about spooky stuff. Sometimes things come over, but they come over at different stages and different times, and different fads strike differently. And so, yeah, shadow work, we got this bullshit because the New Agers, who also really like self-help books, brought it over. And some witch put it out somewhere, and then it got popular because the word shadow's in the name. So that's how we got here, really. Like, as far as I can piece together, I've been like trying to look at this for the last 2 months, and I just, as far as I can tell, that's the story. Like, you don't find really anything witchcraft adjacent talking about shadow work until like the year 2000 at all, but that was like a tarot book aimed at New Agers that I found. Like, I think there's some other sort of, but like none of it is like big or mainstream or in vital important books. And then it's really, really within the last 6 years that this entire idea explodes. And I think it's a bad thing. And this is where we're going into pure opinion, right? Like, it's everything, like all this stuff, most of the stuff before was like where it came from, what it is. And I don't think we need to disagree on that. Like, we know it came from Carl Jung. We know it's a psychology exercise. We know it's about confronting and integrating the parts of ourselves we don't like, the Jungian shadow, that we know it's that. But here's the thing. I don't think, as a community, I think we have a responsibility as a community not to be recommending to new witches that they should be doing what is effectively a psychology exercise without the supervision of a trained mental health professional. I don't think we should be recommending that as a blanket statement. And I don't think that most of us have the experience and authority to be recommending who should and shouldn't be going down that kind of path or exercise, right? I, as a person who the most mental health training they had was taking Psych 101 in college a long ass time ago, definitely does not have the authority to tell you whether or not you should or shouldn't be doing a psychology exercise, and neither do freaking most of the people coming out here saying it. And it's so deeply irresponsible, because when we talk about shadow work, we're talking about trauma. And look, people have come at me saying like, oh, are you against self-improvement? I'm not against self-improvement. Are you against people dealing with trauma? I am definitely not against people dealing with trauma. I am, however, an advocate for fucking therapy. Shout out Cat in the Hurricane. Anyways, I am an advocate for fucking therapy. And doing that sort of important thing with a trained mental health professional. Because I don't know if you know this, but trauma leaves deep scars. And if you're telling you and your random witch on the internet ass does not have the authority to know whether or not it is safe for a person to be doing that on their own. I don't think that it is safe for any of us to be doing that. And it comes down to the fact is also, what does this have to do with magic? Again, if you want to include self-improvement as a part of your practice, great. If you are in a place where it is emotionally healthy to do shadow work as a part of your practice, I am not here to tell you what to do. I am not in charge of you. I am saying that I think it's irresponsible for us to be recommending it to others. You may know what is safe for you to do, but you do not know what is safe for other people to do. And again, it's not even, one of the arguments I got into on TikTok when I first started talking about this was someone telling me that like to be a witch is to self-improve, or like this whole thing of like how witchcraft is about self-improvement. And it's, if your witchcraft is about self-improvement, great, awesome, that's great for you. I did not become a witch to get better. I did not become a witch to improve myself. Like, I'm a religious witch. I had a spiritual revelation and a very personal one. And I'm not trying to push that. Again, that's my business and nobody else's. But that's why I became a witch. Also to curse my enemies. I also became a witch to curse my enemies. But importantly, it was not to get better. In many ways, it was to get worse. No, so it's like pushing this philosophy on others and on their practices because you think the purpose of witchcraft is to get better. Bitch, I ain't broken. I mean, I have generalized anxiety disorder, and I spent some time in therapy for that for like a large part of my youth, but that's not... that has nothing to do with my witchcraft. And also I have diabetes. That is so technically a part of me is broken by in a mechanical way. My insulin resistance, but that has nothing to do with my witchcraft. I am not emotionally broken. Self-improvement is a thing that if I choose to pursue, which I do choose to pursue, is independent of my fucking witchcraft. That was the most irritating thing in these discussions I had about this, was people who kept asserting their own universal opinion, universal truths into conversations. All witchcraft conversations are interfaith conversations. Okay, let's just keep that in mind. I'm not in your head. I'm not in your house. And I know that when I say Jungian psychology should not be applied universally to magical practice, someone's going to bring up Carl Jung being into the occult. And I'm just going to tell you, it doesn't fucking matter. First off, he wasn't a witch, but that's beside the point. My dad was a piano salesman. He is technically still sells pianos, just not directly to customers. He sells them to stores. And that's most of his career. My dad loves basketball. And while he may use basketball to relate to a client, basketball and pianos, just because one guy knows about both of them doesn't mean that they're the same. In the end, shadow work is a psychology exercise. And when we recommend to new witches that they need to do shadow work, we are recommending that they are doing a psychological exercise without the supervision of a mental health professional, and that you are not qualified to know whether or not that new witch is in a mental state where it is safe for them to do this exercise. Assuming that this exercise is correct, because we are talking about Jung, and not every psychologist agrees with Jung's concepts. And none of us, with the exception, I'm sure that there are some licensed mental health professionals who are witches. I fully believe that. They're the only witches who can make that call. And I hope that they are more responsible than the people who make these blanket statements. And you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with everything I say on this topic, but I think that we have a responsibility as in our community, to not make these recommendations. I think it's important that we don't. So it's like, if you want to know why I get so impassioned about this, is because I'm concerned. There are real dangers here that I think people are ignoring, because they're not even what's amazing to me is that a lot of these people who recommend that, oh, you have to do shadow work, have no fucking clue where it comes from. They just have no idea. They see the word shadow and they think witchcraft, and it's just remarkable to me. Yeah. So that's where we're going to call it for this episode. Oh my God, an episode at the normal length for once. Who would have guessed? Anyways, I want to thank you guys for listening to yet another episode of this ridiculous show. This show is really brought to you by the people who support the show on Patreon. I want to thank you guys so much. Even just $1 a month really helps pay the bills for the show, because we got hit with a DDoS attack at the beginning of August, and I had to fight to keep the site from going down. So that was fun. Bills. Anyways, I want to thank my patrons at the $10 level of Lindsay Dosey, Bruce Norville, Courtney, Claire Dennis, Pamela Starrick, and Elder Gamble. And remember that at the $10 level, you get a shout out like this and access to a bunch of ebooks and neat stuff like that. Any support at any level, though, gives you these episodes a whole week early. And just by supporting the show, you help keep it going. You help keep it up on the internet where it remains currently. Please remember, if you are an iTunes listener, an Apple Podcast listener, and you're going through the archives, please remember that the older green logo feed is missing some episodes out of the archive. There is a second feed, the white logo feed, that if you search for BS Free Witchcraft on Apple Podcasts, you will find that, and that does have the complete archives of the show. Please rate and review on that feed if you can, because it's new, so it doesn't have the ratings, it doesn't have the reviews that the old feed does, so it doesn't appear in search results as easily. So if you can, and if you're an Apple Podcast user, please rate and review that feed. If you are a Spotify listener, please rate and review us there too, because I like to get listened to on the Spotify. That would be nice. And this show does also go up on YouTube in video form. And please like and subscribe. I believe those are the magic words on YouTube of like and subscribe. But if you are able to support, if you don't have money and don't want to support the Patreon, please remember you can follow me on social media. I am at traegorn.bsky.social on Blue Sky, at traegorn.tumblr.com on Tumblr, and at traegorn on TikTok. And if you want to follow the show on Facebook, there is a page for the show at facebook.com/BS3Witchcraft. Please do not go to my personal page. That's where I talk to my mom. I will ignore your friend request. But also, just a reminder, I'm an author. I have books out. The Witch and the Rose, Bloody Damn Right, Shadowcasting. My novels, they are out. I am the author of the webcomic Peregrine Lake, which is drawn by the wonderful Ethan Flanagan, and you can find that webcomic I write at peregrine-lake.com if you want to read a weekly Northwoods Gothic comic written by me. And remember, this show is a part of the Nerd and Type Podcast Network, a network of geeky, independent, creator-owned media where we produce books, YouTube videos, and podcasts. Right now, remember, there's always Hex Positive, the other great witchcraft podcast that is on this network, where Bree talks about cool ass stuff. I will be also appearing at Crit WitchCon this year, I think. I'm doing a little thing on the Friday of the event. Let me quick look. I think it is Friday the 26th. I'll be appearing at Crit WitchCon. That goes that whole weekend, and I will try to include a link to that in the show notes. And I just accidentally closed a window on my computer, which was not the one I was trying to close. But importantly, it was not the recording this episode, so we're going to keep rolling, and I will probably leave this in, unlike all the other things I've had to edit out. Anyways, thank you for joining me on another month of this. I know that the world is not so great, and there's a lot of things to be concerned about. There are a lot of shadows in the dark that are far more real than anything else we might face. And I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm listening. I'm glad that you're listening to me, and that whispers in the dark sometimes help us through the worst of times. And I'm glad that you've spent time with me this month to let me yelling. This was not a whisper in the dark. This was a lot of yelling in the dark. And with that, Magicians, I'm just going to remind you, dirt in our fingernails, brick in our hand. And I'll talk to you next month.